And now comes the mayors. Good morning. As they are getting seated, my name's Jackie Hinman. I'm the chair and CEO of CH2M, a Fortune 500 engineering, construction, and operations company. And I also serve as the chair of the Infrastructure Committee of the Business Roundtable, which is a group of about 200 CEOs representing the largest companies in the U.S. who support investment in infrastructure as the backbone of the American economy and a catalyst for both job creation and quality of life. So I'm going to make a few remarks to set the context for this fantastic panel we have, and then we'll let our mayors talk about their innovation in infrastructure. Now, I've been counting off all the statistics we've heard this morning, and I think I still have a few we haven't heard. Every dollar spent on infrastructure represents, in the U.S., $3 in economic activity. Over $300 billion in economic output would be generated in the year 2020 if U.S. infrastructure investment was boosted by just 1% of GDP per year. And I think we all know that our infrastructure quality ranking has now dropped again to 16th in the world, behind Denmark and Portugal. Let me speak for a moment about why we haven't made the progress we want, because clearly we know that there is demand, and frankly, there is ample supply. The vast majority of infrastructure upgrades that are needed are easy to implement. They don't require technology or methods mostly that haven't been invented, and they can easily be built. You know, some people would say that there's not enough money to make these fixes, and that's certainly a challenge at local levels, but there are states and cities that have been able to make their budgets work and have made major strides in infrastructure and smart cities. From a national level, and particularly from public-private partnerships, private financing, there's been a larger supply of money available at reasonable rates than we've ever seen in the past few years. The main challenge, I think, that we all see is from historic infrastructure project definition, funding, and implementation, that they're changing, particularly in the areas of water and transportation. And now we have newer constraints and methods that require more innovative thinking. But I'm an optimist, and we're going to hear some examples today of where we've seen some real success. In the area of infrastructure funding, clearly there has been some legislative gridlock. We all know that, and we probably expect that's going to continue at least for the next several months. And we know that this filters into states and cities. But 2/3 of the states now enable legislation that allows them to take advantage of alternate financing and funding when there are constraints at the federal, national level, and that's a good start. And we'll hear today about how these changes are being tackled at the local level, with mayors doing everything from achieving smarter solutions within the same funding framework to using traditional methods such as tax increases or implementing public-private partnerships, taking advantage of grants and other funding sources to meet their needs. Second reason for optimism is in the area of permitting. Now, in several recent infrastructure bills, both water and transportation, we're seeing attempts to streamline burdensome permitting processes in the language. And once federal agencies can make these come alive and implement these in a way that helps states and cities, we think we can see faster and smarter project implementation. So ladies and gentlemen, there is innovation and there is hope. And speaking of hope, let's go to our panel. We're lucky that our panelists today are all experienced second-term mayors that have led the way with their achievements. I'm betting that's why they're second-term mayors. They have found better ways to make their cities great, and I urge you to help me welcome them. We have Mayor Sly James from Kansas City, Missouri, who's making Kansas City one of America's smartest cities, also known as the new Silicon Prairie. We have Mayor Stephanie Miner from Syracuse, using an innovation team to fight back against a critical water infrastructure challenge. And Mayor David Condon from Spokane, Washington, who's been successful in promoting green infrastructure and lowering costs for clean water and other infrastructure solutions. So I'm going to start by asking each mayor a question about their successes. We'll explore a few concepts as a panel, and then we will actually open up the dialogue for Q&A. Am I on? Okay, here we are. I'm going to go ahead and start with Mayor Miner. So remarkably, Syracuse averaged more than 1 water main break per day over 2014 and 2015, and many of the pipes were over 100 years old. And you found a way to solve that, both from an innovation team with new approaches and also particularly using information technology and other technology methods. How did you do it? What approaches did you take?
Well, let me just say solve is a strong word. We have found a way to mediate the impact. What we have done is recognize that there has been a revolution in data technology that has not been taken to look at how you maintain and update your infrastructure. And so we put a group of people, which are called the Innovation Team, which is funded through a grant by Bloomberg Philanthropies. I colloquially refer to them as my nerds. And I said to my nerds, we have a big infrastructure problem. Tell me what we can do in order to solve it within the resources that we have. And what they did was found a way to use data and technology to be able to predict where you're going to have big breaks, and before they become catastrophic, repair them. Because the single biggest expense in infrastructure is when you cut the road and you dig down. If you can do that in a more managed way, rather than just constantly responding. So we have implemented sensors that are, relatively speaking, very inexpensive, that they're just kind of magnets that you put on top of the pipes that continuously read data, put it to the cloud, and then between the sound measurements, what it does is it shoots it back to our folks who look at it and say, that's a small leak that could be, that's on a very large water main that could be a huge problem for the city. Let's wait until there's a weekend when we can repair it, or that's a leak that's going to be catastrophic soon, let's get in there. And so part of what has happened as the federal government and state government have stopped making money available for maintaining infrastructure is that we have lost the ability to keep up on all of these new technologies, which make us. The new technologies mean that a dollar can go much further than it used to go. And you can use this technology to be predictive and to be much more efficient and effective.
Thank you very much. So speaking of technology, Mayor James.
Yes.
Kansas City was the first U.S. city to get Google Fiber in the hopes of drawing startups and technology-based businesses, and you've recently launched a smart city framework. What's been the impact on economic development and on quality of life? And how'd you get it done?
Well, first of all, I need to give credit to people who were working on it while I was still running for office. I was engaged, but certainly not as deep as they were. And I remember being at the Unity Breakfast the day after the election and thinking, dreaming about taking some time off and getting my law practice squared away so I could hand it off. And the president of the chamber comes over, leans over, whispers in my ear, can you hang around for a short meeting after, which turned out to be 2 hours, and then thrown into the negotiations on Google. So for a couple of months, that was mayor without portfolio and certainly mayor without any pay. I'm not sure which bothered me more. But anyhow, we got the contracts done, and 2011, late May of 2011, they announced that we had been selected, and we started working from that point on. And the good thing about working with Google is that they invested over $300 million in Kansas City, hired over 100 subcontractors for construction, who in turn had well over 1,000 people working in construction. And once the construction was done, of course, then there were permanent jobs that came out of it as well. We found out a couple of things. Number one, Google came to us basically as a puzzle. You know, jigsaw puzzles, when you buy them, there's a picture on the front of the box that shows you what it's supposed to look like. Their box was brown. There was no picture. Their puzzle pieces were scattered. And they basically said, here's a puzzle, figure out what to do with it. So we set up between Mayor Joe Reardon and I, Joe Reardon was the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas. We set up a bi-state innovations team. And we had that team work for a year to figure out what we could do and how we could monetize and maximize the return on investment of being the first 2 cities in the country to have gigabit speed. And they worked on that, and they put together the digital playbook, which we still use today to drive digital innovation and job creation. Subsequent to that, once the basics were done and Google started pushing out its home product, they had a very unique marketing plan. Their marketing plan was to get all of the neighborhoods in the city that were going to be first divided into what they call fiberhoods, parts of neighborhoods, or in some places all of neighborhoods. And the idea was that for a $10 deposit, you could reserve your spot for Google Fiber to the home. And the first fiber hoods that came back with the recommended percentage, whether it was 60% or 70% or whatever, they would be the first in the queue to get construction in their area. What that showed is that there was a huge digital divide in the city. And it broke down along racial lines, traditional racial lines, to traditional poverty lines. And the way that we knew it was because when the fiber hoods reached their goal, they turned green on the map. And when they didn't, they turned red. So right down the street where everybody considers to be the racial dividing line, red on one side, green on the other, and we went, this ain't good. So we had to set about fixing that. That's one of the quality of life issues that I'm really happy about, because what it did was it created coalitions, grassroots coalitions and public-private coalitions and private coalitions, not-for-profits, whatever. Everybody turned to this issue as being extremely important to solve, and we're working on that, and we've made great inroads. Beyond that, we had another phenomenon that occurred, grassroots, on State Line Road, called the Startup Village. And basically, it was a couple of people who owned houses that were not being used, and they basically decided that they would let entrepreneurs who wanted to take advantage of the 1 gigabit speed come to those homes, the village, and live there for a half year or a year while they worked on a project, basically rent-free. And so that attracted a lot of people to the area who started businesses there, et cetera. So as a direct result of that, we've been able to leverage Google, and there's a lot more to the story, a lot of success stories. We've been able to leverage Google as a point that we are using to compete as one of the 7 remaining cities for the $50 million DOT Smart City Grant. And the reason for that is Google has been the catalyst that allowed us to have a public-private partnership with Cisco and Sprint to do smart and connected cities. We're the largest smart and connected city in the continent along our streetcar line. So all of those things came together because Google was a catalyst, and we leveraged that into other partnerships and collaborative efforts.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. Mayor Condon, you recently implemented a plan to upgrade wastewater infrastructure, roads, and the Riverfront Park in Spokane, and used a smarter government approach that included faster permitting and improved planning, and on top of that, saved about $150 million. How did you do it, and what were the biggest challenges you had in changing some of your processes?
Well, I think first, you said it, we brought all of the pieces together. I actually, on the back table back there, there's a piece called Link Spokane, and it was an initiative to really bring together all of the different infrastructure across the city, everything from parks to streets to roads, and quite fundamentally, as we all know, roads, the mayor just talked about it. As soon as you open them up, what's underneath all those roads but our utilities? The city of Spokane owns our utilities, everything except power and natural gas. And so we look at those roads as really three-dimensional. So that was number one. Even to this year, we will now bring our roads department into our utilities department, go to a public works. We are one of the first in the country that then leases our roads to the utilities. So for $5 million a year, they pay a franchise fee so that our utilities now runs our road system. What does this mean? It means that when you have to treat stormwater, all of a sudden you look at roads a little bit different. They're the collection device, and so therefore our roads have, where they weren't needed to be as wide as they were, they've skinnied those up. We've used permeable pavement that adds the trail system and the bike system. We also, and I brought it for the first time this last year, put together our operating budget with our capital budget. In a city of Spokane, about $210,000, an operating budget about $180 million a year. We will spend just under $1 billion on infrastructure over the next 6 years. What that's really allowed us to do is to really look at our finances completely different. And so the savings came from integration. Case in point, combined sewer overflow tanks, 22 of them in our city. 2 of them were going to be on city property. Now 19 of them are on city property. So we didn't have to purchase all that. We also then really took a different look at the way we looked at the risk of complying with the Clean Water Act, really right-sized it because we were able to go into green infrastructure, because guess what? The park system owns the most properties, so many of those tanks are on our park property, and therefore then all of a sudden really lent themselves in the culture of the Parks Department to green infrastructure. And really we were proud at the end. I was down in front of the credit raters about 18 months ago now, in preparation for both a street levy and a park bond. We were, I believe, the 3rd or 4th city in the country to sell green bonds, and it was CH that really validated that those some $200 million in projects were all green projects. And for us, for a city that is on the river, the quality of our river, Spokane River that goes into the Columbia River, is really the center of our community. So it really, as you'll see, and I'll finish here, the reason why this is printed on newsprint is because the big piece, and I think as we heard this morning, the public was bought into this, and that went out in our 2 local newspapers so they could really see where it all came together, because at the end of the day, the public doesn't care a lot about what's underneath the ground, except when the water doesn't turn on or the toilet doesn't flush. But what they really care about is what's on top of it. So you'll see in this that has been out in both of our newspapers, I think twice now, where they really see a 1 million gallon tank, but really the benefit of it in a real sense of what are the new features that they'll see in their neighborhoods.
Thank you. So you've all talked about the public in one way or another. What infrastructure issues do you think that your citizens, the public, the voters, are least aware of, but are also critically important for you to be able to move infrastructure forward in your city?
Well, I would say that the voters of the city of Syracuse, besides being the smartest voters around, as a mayor who, I came into office, and the year I came into office was where we started seeing really the level of failure in our water main system, which is 100 years old, older in some parts of our city. We're an older city where the climate is cold. When it's old, it's cold, and cold, your water mains freeze and break. So I have been talking about this for a long time, but the next part of the advocacy is, I know they all understand infrastructure. They think it's important. They think that it is fundamentally a government responsibility. I've been talking about water mains long before Flint, Michigan, long before we started seeing people testing their water for lead. But now the next part of that is, well, who is ultimately responsible for making sure you bring your infrastructure up into a state of good repair? Mm-hmm. And that's when it gets complicated, because when your infrastructure fails and your water doesn't come on, or you have sewage coming up through houses, people turn to the mayor, rightly so, and say, you got to fix this. And you can't then say to them, well, for 20 to 30 years, there's been a disinvestment by the federal government and the state government, and we've had to pay pension costs and healthcare costs, so we haven't really invested in bringing this up to a state of good repair. So I say that as a very shorthand way to say that the responsibility for maintaining and upgrading our infrastructure needs to be spread across all levels of government. And yet, in my view, my humble view, the only ones that are being held accountable for it are local officials.
How does this dialogue continue in either Spokane or Kansas City? What do you wish your voters or citizens
You know, I think that's, you know, the understanding of the magnitude of the issue, and that's really, you know, you can talk about, you know, pipes and pavement, and you can talk, you know, you do any type of polling in our community. Streets is always at the top of the issue, and that's really where we launched this Link Spokane initiative, is to show them, you'll get a new street. I mean, right now, this summer, largest construction summer we've ever seen, about 180 million. That's about triple of what we normally do. And so when people see the roads opened up and they see the pipes getting redone, we're redoing one right now. We're similar climate, not, you know, northwest, not northeast, a little bit, but still the cold. And so they see the pipes getting redone. They see the sewer pipe getting redone. They're seeing the water pipe. I was just out doing ride-alongs all summer long and was out there with our construction crews. And, you know, even as labor said, they also see the job impact. I mean, when we see in a city our size at that level of tripling the construction, they also see when you talk, we talk a lot about the Spokane River and how clean it is, but when you're talking about putting a tank of some 500,000 gallons, and it makes sense to them that we're putting it into the street and not tearing people's homes down, because they saw that. They saw homes being torn down for a couple of our early on, and we had no plan of what to do with them afterwards. We have an amazing park system. Our park system was designed by the same firm that designed Boston's park system and also New York's system, so we're very proud of our parks. And so the reality was, everybody's, well, what do we do with these afterwards? Now, what's fascinating is we have a charter school that's in the center of our city. We had to put one of these large tanks, and I just handed the ceremonial key over to the charter school because they didn't have any green space. Now we turned that into green space. So even the cost, they have to see the benefit, I think, in their day-to-day life, because their expectation is that the toilet flushes and the water turns on. And why doesn't it happen? I mean, it's horrible what's happening nationally, but I think the attention now, just last week we announced we have 485 hookups that still have lead couplings out of 72,000. So we have very few amount, but that allowed us then, because of the publicity, we now over the next 2 years will remove those, and all 486 of them, we sent lead sampling kits to their homes, don't have anything to worry about, but we're taking them out preventively. So there's been some benefit to the national attention, but I would suggest that's still a little different. It's all on the locals.
Well, I would say, I heard one of the speakers earlier say that infrastructure matters and talk about the relationship between the federal, state, and local governments. Let me say that mayors matter, and the federal government ought to skip the state government entirely. Sorry, send the money directly to the cities for a couple of reasons. You know, first of all, we have shovel-ready projects, and we know where they are. And I think we actually do a better job of coordinating and collaborating with other municipalities. But as far as what our citizens don't know, our citizens haven't been asked to know. There has been a concerted effort, I think, in municipalities to keep the price and the cost of water at the lowest possible levels. And people, for whatever reason, think that it's free. It's free. Okay, well, it's never been free. It's just been artificially suppressed. And now the chickens are kind of coming home to roost in our administrations and the ones going forward. And people have to understand that particularly as the federal government, the EPA, has gotten into the overflow control issues. Residents didn't really distinguish between wastewater, sewers, and water. It was water. They got a bill and they paid it. Now they're beginning to understand some of the variances, and along with that, some of the huge costs. Our water rates are rising precipitously every year because that's the only way that we have to deal with the now almost $4 billion unfunded mandate to separate our overflow control systems that we're in about 5 years into on a 25-year project. So I think that they don't really have a true understanding of the cost and, unfortunately, the the coming scarcity of water. This is not an everlasting resource.
Let me just bolster something that Sly said, that, you know, so we have, in New York State, have advocated, and, you know, you heard some of the speakers before talk about these monstrous potholes, you know, and that's something everybody drives, everybody knows about potholes. And when the transportation bill was up last year, I came down and advocated it, and money came from that. And then the state said, well, you know, we've been hearing from all these people about potholes. So now there's more money available to fix roads. The frustration that I have and that I've shared with both the federal and state officials is, so you do a road reconstruction because you got that money. But if a water main blows up underneath it, you've just wasted that money. If you were to give us the money and the flexibility so that we could dig once. So when we go in and do that road, you do the utilities, you do the water main, then you do some green infrastructure and stormwater runoff, and then you can move to the next one. So that investment in Syracuse, it's about $1 million a mile to do a total road reconstruction. That's going to stay for the life of the road, 10 to 15 years. We use a lot of salt in Syracuse because we have a lot of snow. But so now we're in I'm going to take the money by all means, and I'm thankful for the money, but knowing that because of the way the system has worked, that it's not being as efficiently spent as it could. And if we had money and a policy that said dig once, fix all that infrastructure. So once you go in, you've got the money, because if I can't use money from the state earmarked for roads to fix water mains, it's not, but I should be able to.
And I think that's a critical, we talk a lot about integration. There's a couple of councils here in DC of interagency, and you get points. I think the Tiger Grant that was just spoken about, the city of Spokane, or in our area, we just, last couple of years, 35 million, 19 million. And they talk about all these different things that get you points out of DOT, but no, there is no pot of dollars that actually is pre-integrated. We actually fundamentally have done that at this city. We went to a street levy, so we moved from bond financing to a levy, kept the rate the same. I have a city average income or median household income, $43,000. We're very proud. Talked about economic development. We actually see people now reacting to the infrastructure being better, so we went up from 39,000 to 43,000 last year. We're very pleased with that. But obviously the cost of government. I came into office because my predecessor just increased water rates 16%, had planned on increasing them 25% the next year. I've committed that we'll never increase water rates over inflation. What that's allowed us to do, though, is we will now, because guess what water rates did? They followed the election cycle. So there was none, all of a sudden up, and we have a strong mayor, but our city council, 7 members, half up every other year. So you got these long drawn periods. Now we, for the first time ever, got a multi-year water rate and sewer rate, so for 3 years. So that predictability that labor was just talking about this morning, now our businesses know we're able to use it actually as an economic driver, because our surrounding areas are looking at 17, 18, 22% increases in their utility rates. And if you come into our city, you know that it's going to be somewhere around 3%, 2.7, 2.9. And that really facilitated, especially on the financing side, because now we knew exactly what our income was going to be. We changed also the rate structure, went up slightly on the base rate and reduced the graduation on the water rate use, which really allowed us to have more constant funding streams, much better on the construction side. Because guess what? You take your water bill usually a month late in our community. The huge increases over the summer for obvious reasons. And we didn't know how we were going to let those projects in the spring, because if we had a low water use summer, we didn't have enough money to pay the bill. So our base rate, that first gallon of water is the most expensive. After you get the first gallon to someone's house, it's much easier to, but we still have huge conservation efforts in our community, down about 10% a year.
Thank you. All right, let me take some questions from the audience. Who's going to be the brave first asker? The crowd goes wild. No questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, if you could, just so we could hear you a little bit.
I would say that you have to have a campaign, but I want to put that in the context of being a mayor. the world and people's lives are so busy and so complicated, and there's so much information coming at them all of the time. Like literally people's lives are like information superhighways. So to get them to focus on something, you have to, have what we would call campaign. My experience has been people implicitly believe that infrastructure is something that a government should do and that should be paid for. Where the disconnect happens, candidly, is they don't trust the state government or the federal government that if you give them the resources, it's going to come back to infrastructure. I think there's more trust in local governments because they know they can grab Sly at the grocery store, they know they can grab me or David, and they can look in the whites of our eyes and say, you better be taking this money and we want to see it. But yeah, you have to educate the populace on almost anything you want to do these days.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It's not something that you can assume. You have to be intentional about educating about very specifics, and you have to have a goal in mind, and it's something that you should package in a way that shows the public the direct benefits to them as to why you're doing this. If it's just like, oh, we need it because it'd be a good thing, you got to show how this is going to help them in their lives. Where's the benefit for them?
I mean, literally, that's why we went into these newsprint articles so that you could see it. Also, I'm talking about the grocery store. They really see, especially as we talk about multimodal and multi-purpose for our streets. Believe it or not, those swales, which slow down traffic in neighborhoods, is really how we saved $150 million in the city of Spokane, because now that water is going through a natural swale rather than going through a gray tank and then into a sewage treatment plant. And so people really see it. But I'll tell you, I all the time say, let's put up the big reader boards. They put up the mandatory red slash marks that say application for permit. Right next to it is some of the renderings, and then you'll see in these brochures, we do the renderings all the time so people can see that
So they
benefit.
can see 'em. Great. There's a question right here. And let's be mindful, we've got about 2 minutes left. Who wants to take that?
Public-private partnerships are the new rage. I mean, it's not new, but it's a rage. And it's very rightfully so, because it's the only way that we're able to get things done. When we did our Smart and Connected Cities, for example, we leveraged $3.7 million of investment from the city into a $17 million deal. And we'll get our money back from the commercial aspects of the 23 kiosks that we have in the downtown area connected to the streetcar line. So first of all, I think that we have to be much more imaginative about how we get things done. There's not enough money in government. We can't get a part-time job as a city. Lord knows if you try to cut back wages of any of our public labor organizations, that's never going to happen. So we have to find ways to get things done, and public-private partnerships is a good way to do it.
Any last comments?
I would just say that I like accountability, and I don't want public-private partnerships or the rage for that to allow federal and state officials to get off the hook for providing resources.
Read there.
Great. Thank you so much. Round of applause for Mayors James, Minor, and Condon.